for example, what communities exist in my Facebook graph. And then we'll be able to compute something like this, showing kind of how the graph breaks up into different pieces. And if the graph had 1 million nodes, it would also work. We could deal with other kinds of things, like let's say we want to deal with images. Let's a picture here. Okay, the lousy picture, but let's take the picture and let's say we want to find edges in that picture. So we go take the picture and edge detect the picture. Or we could, for example, say, let's dynamically edge detect a picture of me. So now we've told it here. Let me scroll that up the page a bit. So now we've told it to just do this computation in real time of finding edges in this particular image. Okay, so we can do all sorts of kinds of computation. These are sort of things where
el otro, abajo tengo un cable para el otro lado. ¿Cómo cambié el link? ¿Te acuerdas? Por el otro lado. Me pides el cable, no tengo un cable. Hola, sí. Hola, sí. Hola, sí. Ya. Hola, sí. Hola, sí. 1, 2. Listo. Hola, sí. Hola, sí.
¿Aló? Hola, buenas tardes. Mientras mientras no viene Stephen, vamos a aprovechar para presentarlo. Más fácil hablar cuando no está, ¿no? Aparte, bueno, no habla español, ¿ya? Creo que la mayoría de ustedes han recibido el mensaje de correo electrónico explicando más o menos con quién vamos a estar ahora. Acabamos de tener una reunión pequeña con un grupo de los chicos de Computer Science, arriba en un salón, y ahí nos acabamos de enterar que no había almorzado. Entonces, ya le habían pedido algo de comida y ahora lo tienen comiendo porque no quería comer. Se acordó que no había comido. ¿Ya? Entonces, eso es. Entre algunas de las cosas que han podido leer seguramente, es que Stephen terminó un doctorado en física de partículas con 20 años de edad. ¿Dónde está Katia? Katia tiene mejor memoria que yo. Empezó, si no me equivoco, en la Universidad de Oxford y le pareció súper aburrida. Y de ahí se pasó a la Universidad de California, a la UCLA. Ahí ha terminado el doctorado en 2 años, ¿no? Aproximadamente, eso lo pueden encontrar en su Wikipedia. Andaba un poco acelerado por ahí y terminó en 2 años. Y una de las cosas que le han preguntado ahora en el salón es ¿por qué trabaja ahora en ciencia de la computación si antes él era físico? Y lo que dijo es que en la época en la que él estaba estudiando en la universidad en los 70s, más o menos, ¿no? Ese era el área de conocimiento que se movía más rápido, ¿no? Y ahora es computación. Entonces, por eso es que él ha migrado hacia computación, por toda la aceleración que eso provoca, y por eso es que ahora ya no es tan físico, ¿no? Como antes. Es el inventor del sistema del Siri, que es el sistema de asistente que tienen los iPhone, ¿no? Y algunas de las cosas que estuvimos leyendo sobre él también es que algunas de las cosas que le comentó a Steve Jobs en su momento no las entendió, pero después volvió a pedirle algunas disculpas, ¿no? Porque no lo había entendido en su momento, ¿correcto? Entonces, también en medio de toda la literatura que habíamos conseguido, ¿dónde está Eddie? Me ayudó aquí. No sé si es más fácil encontrarte en Boston que acá, ¿no? A veces allá y a veces acá. Y también que había sido... oh, no fuiste tú, no fue Raji, ¿no? El que escribió eso, que dijo que en la literatura habíamos encontrado que Steve Jobs lo había comparado con Isaac Newton, ¿no? Por todas las contribuciones y todas las cosas que había hecho. Así que realmente es un lujo poder tenerlo acá. Él mismo había querido también dar una charla acá. Es la primera charla que va a dar aquí. Para los que no sepan, el jueves en la mañana va a volver a dar una charla, pero solamente para niños de colegios. Ya se ha organizado otra charla solamente para chiquitos de colegio. Y otra cosa que también es interesante saber es que me parece que no va a utilizar ningún PowerPoint. Simplemente se pone a hablar y no para hasta que lo cortemos, ¿no? O hasta que le dé hambre más o menos. Así que realmente creo que pueden pedirle. Ahora no creo que va a tener hambre porque lo tienen alimentándolo. Entonces pueden preguntarle lo que sea, ¿no? Realmente es una oportunidad muy buena para preguntarle lo que sea. Y es bastante accesible y se ha comportado súper bien, ¿no? Con los chicos. Se han sacado una foto por ahí, ¿ya? Entonces les pido un poquito de paciencia porque esto no estaba planeado que le iba a dar hambre a esta hora. Y bueno, ya cuando venga ya no lo vamos a presentar mucho, ¿ok? Así que les pido un poquitín de paciencia, por favor. Ahorita va a bajar. ¿Él está al costado? Él es una caricatura. Ahí está, él es.
Una hora, hacer una presentación para que haya unos 20 minutos de preguntas, ¿sabes? Cosas que terminamos tipo 8:15, ¿no? ¿Está bien? Sí, voy a...
¿Aló? Buenas noches. Buenas noches a todos. Muchas gracias por venir. Thanks for coming. We are now ready to begin this talk with Professor Stephen Wolfram. We are really glad to have Professor Wolfram here. I just want to tell you that if you need to ask something, you need to ask for the mic, okay? Because they are recording all the talk. Are you ready? Okay, so we are now ready. Please welcome Professor Stephen Wolfram.
Okay, great. Well, pleased to be here today. I've been meaning to visit Peru for many years, and finally, I'm actually doing it now. We actually started an office in Peru, in Lima, 5 years ago, and actually a year ago, we started having a small office right here in this building. So I want to talk a little about the general trajectory of computational science and computational everything, talk a little bit about technology that I've spent the last 30 years building, and talk a bit about the future and what it means for engineering, education, and so on. So I think kind of the big theme is that if you look at different fields, there's kind of, I would say for any field X that ranges from archaeology to zoology, there either is now a computational X or there soon will be. And so it's sort of a paradigm, this idea of using computation to do things is kind of a paradigm that goes across all different fields. It's sort of a foundational idea that's probably the most important kind of idea that's emerged in the past century or so. And so I've been for a very long time interested in taking this idea of computation and seeing how to apply it as widely as possible. So the kind of focus of a lot of what I've done is building a stack of technology that we call Wolfram language that allows one to kind of make use of computation in as many places as possible. There have been kind of two big sort of spin-offs from Wolfram language. One is Mathematica, and the other is Wolfram Alpha. These are Mathematica is very widely used system in the kind of research and development area and in education for doing all sorts of technical computations. Wolfram Alpha is the system that is something that a large fraction of use to do technical kinds of things, and it's also something that powers, for example, the Siri intelligent assistant for iOS and other such things where you're answering questions about the world. But okay, let me start off by actually showing you a little bit of Wolfram language, which is what powers all those things. Let me make this a little bigger. It's easier to see. So basically, the idea is you are interacting with the computer in what we call a notebook, where the basic setup is you ask a question, the computer tries to give you a response. So that was a very trivial question. Fortunately, it got the right answer. We could maybe make it a little less trivial. Oops. And go away.
I think you're cool.
No, that's nice, but not relevant. Okay, so so that's just another computation we just asked the system to do. So the idea here is we're trying to compute all sorts of different things. So let's say, for example, we want to plot a graph. We say plot sine x from 0 to 10. Okay, it looks like that. We could say let's make this a dynamic plot. So let's say we say manipulate plot sine x plus, let's say, sine a times x. And let's say a goes from, let's say, 1 to 5, like this. And now we should get something where we'll have a little control there. We change a, and we'll start to see this this thing. We could see. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Let's say 30 here. Okay, so now we should start to see all sorts of fun phenomena and so on as we change that parameter. And let's just to make things a little bit more elaborate here. Let's say we'll make this into a 3D plot. So let's put in, I don't know, let's put in something like this. What is this going to look like? I have no idea what this is going to look like. But let's just give it a try. Let's see what that looks like. Oh, it's a big mess. Let's try it for a smaller value here. Oops. So, but the idea is that we're able to just let's change this parameter here. Okay, it's kind of interesting. So so we're okay. So one of the ideas here is that we can do computations on all sorts of different kinds of things. So let's say, for example, I want to make a network. I could say make a network of 100 nodes, 200 edges, let's say. That will make a kind of random network of points. I could say take that, make a plot of the communities inside that network. We might get a result like that. Another thing I might do is to say, let's do something with, let's say, images. So I could say, get the current image from this. Oh, stop it! What is this happening here? I keep on hitting the wrong button. I could ask it to use our very technology, but so okay. So this will just use the take a picture with my camera here, and now I could take that picture and I could, for example, say, let's just detect edges in that picture. So it'll look like that. Maybe I could say dynamically detect edges on the current image. And now I've got something which will run in real time. Maybe I can do, let's make this a little bit more elaborate. Let's say I take this image, and let's say I'm doing edge detection, but I want to nestedly do edge detection. So I want to edge detect first just once, then detect a second time, and then just keep nesting that, let's say 10 times here. So what that will do is it'll take the edges, and then the edges of the edges, the edges of the edges of the edges, and so on. Maybe I could make that, actually I could probably make that whole thing dynamic if I wanted to. See what that does. So There we go. It's a little slower, but so this gives some sort of idea of the kinds of things that one can start to do. The big point here is to be able to do computation with. So the things I showed you are so far things that kind of come from inside my computer, but we can also deal with computing things about the real world. So one thing we've spent a lot of effort on is teaching the system about real world constructs. So for example, the city of Lima, and it will know things about the city of Lima. So we could say, what's the population of the city of Lima? Actually, a lot of the work that's been done on putting this kind of data about things in the world into the system has been done in Peru. So for example, let's say we could say, let's say something like countries in South America. So now I'm using the natural language understanding system. Come on, wake up, there we go. I'm using the natural language understanding system that we built. And so now I could say, I could say something like, make me a list of those entities, and then I will get a list of countries in South America. I could say, for example, show me, let's do this. Let's say, let's get the flag images from all those countries. Okay, so I could do that. I could, for example, say, let me do this. Let me make a chromaticity plot of the colors that occur in those flags. Okay, so then we get the results. We've got the yellow ones, the red ones, and so on. Maybe I could take those flags. How about we do this? We take that was on line 17. We can say, let's make a feature space plot. This is kind of a machine learning kind of thing to do. Let's make a feature space plot that takes those flags and tries to arrange them with flags that look similar being nearby. Wasn't too interesting because there weren't very many. Maybe I'll do a different example of this. Let's say I take the alphabet. Okay, now let me just make an image from each of those alphabet characters. Let's say rasterize that. And let's say now we make another feature space plot. And what we're doing here is now it will show us which letters are visually similar to which other letters. So Y and V look similar, A and S look similar, and so on. So this is it's a good way of understanding some data, is to try and show it in this sort of feature space that has been constructed with machine learning. But let's go back here and let's do some other things with these. Let's take this list of countries here, and let's say we want to know, how about we do this? Let's find, oh, come on. Let's find capital cities here. So let's say we want to get, of those, we want to say, let's get the capital city. If I can type properly. Okay, so that will get those capital cities. And now, for example, let's say I want to plot those capital cities on a map. I can now go ahead and do that. And there are the capital cities. Just for fun, maybe we could try and do some sort of computer science kind of thing where we find a shortest tour that visits all of those cities. For example, let's say they were on line 23. So let's say we say find shortest tour on line 23. And that will, what did I do wrong? Find shortest tour. No, I know what I did wrong. So the first thing we have to do is to say, what are the geopositions? What are the locations of those cities? Okay, now we can say, give us the shortest tour of those cities. And that will now tell us there's a tour that takes 10,000 miles and goes through the cities in that order. So now let's go back here to line 23, and we say, let's take those cities, and let's use that ordering here, and then let's make a geolist plot of those things and join them up. And so now what we should get is there we go. So there's that, there's a visualization of that particular tour. So I think it's pretty neat that we can kind of do these things as easily as this, where we're using kind of data about the real world and doing computations with that data. So we can do all kinds of different types of computations. We could, for example, let's take the countries in South America here. Hold on, where did we get them? There we go. And let's say we take, let's take those countries, and let's ask for not the flag image, but let's say the population of those countries. So we can say, take those countries, they were on line 16, and ask for the population of each country, and we should be able to get the result there. And now let's say, for example, we'll make an image collage, where we make an image collage with the population of the country and then the flag of that country. So let's see. So this should now make a picture which shows a collage of different country flags with something that's a little odd, but okay. That shows them in proportion to the population of those countries. Okay, so the sort of the big idea here is automate as much as possible in this language. The kind of, from the point of view of computer languages, is sort of an unusual thing that's being done. It's kind of a unique thing that nobody else has really tried to do. Most computer languages put a small amount of capability into the language itself and then let people build up all these libraries around the language. What we've tried to do is to build as much knowledge and capability directly into the language itself. So there are lots of different areas of capability that we have. What's sort of exciting about this is what I was saying at the beginning. We're able to kind of inject computation into all sorts of different areas. Whether we're dealing with something which we know is computational, like engineering, whether we're dealing with something that we might not know was as computational, like history or linguistics or something like that. Maybe we can do, as an example, let's take a something like this. We can say, here, let's do this. Let's take words in. We got words in English. Let's say we take just the first letters of all the words in this list of words in English. And now we say, let's make a word cloud where we're showing these different letters sized according to how frequently they occur as the first letter of a word in English. So we can see that in English, that's the distribution of the most common first letter is S. So for example, let's say we want to do the same thing for Spanish. So I just say language to Spanish here. And hopefully we will be able to do the same kind of thing for that. Okay, so now that's showing that in Spanish there's a different first letter that is the most common in words. And we could go and do all kinds of other analysis like this. But what we're doing immediately is to kind of immediately inject computation into something that we might not have thought was easily amenable to computation. So one of the things that we've been interested in recently is also using machine learning and AI kinds of things. Let's say, for example, let me do this. Let's say web image search for, let's say, colorful birds. So this is just now going to search on the web for images that are described as colorful birds. Hopefully we'll get some result in a minute. Okay, so we got a bunch of images of birds. Now the question is, can we take these images, can we take an image like that, and can we say image identify? So this is now trying to figure out, given that picture, what is that thing? And this is what will happen here. So let's see whether this works. So now what it's doing is it's using machine learning to try to recognize what that image is of. So for example, I could say, that was on line 35, so let me write a little piece of code here that says, take an image and let's label the image. So we say labeled with image identify of the image. And let's say I want to do that for all the things, all those different birds. So now what this will do, that little piece of code there is saying identify the image and use that identification as a label for the picture, and so now we'll get information on those different kinds of birds. So for example, we could also, let's say we take this one here. Oh, actually that one is very unconvincing. That one says it's a fish. Well, let's see how it came to say that that was a fish. So we'd say, let's ask it, image identify that thing, and then let's say we want to know all categories, the 10 most probable identifications, and now let's see what that does. So now this is going to show us its 10 top possible identifications. Okay, so it says it thinks it's a fish, but it thinks it might be an edible fruit, but it thinks down here with very low probability, it thinks it's a warbler, which I think is a type of bird. So what's happened here is so the way this was created was this image identification system was built by training a neural network to recognize images. Actually, we could ask it, we could just say, show me the neural network that you used to do the image identification. So this is now going to be, that's the actual neural network that it is using to do the image identification. So if we take that neural network and we feed it this picture of a bird, it will go ahead and it will tell us the results that it thinks it's an angelfish. But what we could do here, instead of using the whole neural network, let's say we only use, let's say, 10 layers of the neural network. Now it will show us kind of what the system is thinking in the middle of that neural network. And let's see whether we can visualize this a bit, see what happens. Okay, so there we go. So this is kind of the features that the system had detected in the middle of its attempt to identify the image. This was kind of the collection of features that it had found that it was trying to use to decide whether this is a fish, a bird, something completely different. Actually, we can go ahead and use a bit of machine learning. Let's take that, and let's use that same feature space plot that I did before, see if it can okay, there we go. So this is now taking those features that the neural net had recognized internal to the system, and it's showing us kind of how those is distributed in feature space. Okay, well, anyway, so as I say, the idea of this language is to sort of build in, to automate as much of the process of doing computation as possible. So there are many consequences of being able to do that. Let me mention some, for example, for education. So the question is, how should you incorporate this kind of thing into educational process? And I think we're at a very exciting moment, because this kind of capability is something that is accessible sort of throughout the whole spectrum of education, from kind of high school level and even perhaps below through graduate school level, so to speak. And it's kind of a nice time, because we've sort of got these tools, which are kind of the tools that are used by the world's most sophisticated R&D folk, are also accessible to students in being able to learn how to do things computationally. So we've had a big project to kind of understand how to teach using these tools. I wrote a book actually last year about this, which you can find on the web. I hope we can get there. Okay, so this is just my attempt to kind of understand how to navigate through the process of learning computational thinking through Wolfram language. It's sort of an interesting problem, because if you look at an area like mathematics, there's sort of 1,000 years of history that suggest how to teach mathematics. You know, you start with arithmetic, you go on and talk about algebra, you go on and talk about other kinds of things. We don't know what that sequence should be for computational thinking. So we kind of have to invent that now, and what the sequence should be depends on how automated the tools that we've built are. And so what I've been trying to do here is to show, given the level of automation that we've reached in Wolfram language, what is the sequence that we can go through to kind of teach computational thinking. Now, when you have this idea of computational thinking, you can then go and apply it in every possible area. So when it comes to something like engineering, you can start trying to do to think about everything you deal with in engineering in a computational way. So for instance, let's say that we wanted to, let's say we were just doing something geometrical. We could say, for example, let's do this. Let's make a, I'll tell you what, let's do this. Let's say we want to understand the 3D geometry of something we might not normally look at. Let's say the 3D geometry of a mountain. Okay, so what we might do is, let's say, what is a good, actually, let's see if we can do this. Let's see if we can answer this. See if this works. This may or may not work. Okay, mountains, tallest mountains in Peru. Let's say, okay, great. Entity list, that. See if this works. Always good to actually tell, okay. Is that right? Okay, good. Okay, so let's just get that, and let's say geo elevation data of a geodisk. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that mountain, we're going to make a disk that is, let's say, 5, you guys do things in kilometers, so let's do 5 kilometers around that mountain, and then what I'm going to do is try and get the geo elevation, that is the height profile around that mountain. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. Let's say list plot 3D of this, and now what this should do, if this works right, there we go. Okay, so that should be the profile of that mountain. We can make it a little bit more beautiful here. Let's say we say mesh functions goes to this. So then we should be able to make it so that it will draw essentially contour lines around that mountain. Okay, so now we can take this, and for example, we could say let's take that mountain and let's try and 3D print that mountain. Okay, so let's say we say 3D print out of this. Let's see if this works. Okay, so now what it will do is sort of solve the computational geometry problem of taking that particular surface and turning it into something printable. Might take it, it's actually maybe harder to figure out how to set this up for printing than it is to do every other step here. Actually, it's not going to be that exciting because I don't have a 3D printer connected to my computer. So let's it's just going to say, yeah, we can 3D print this. Okay, let's stop doing that. But maybe we can, let's pick another kind of geometry. Let's say we want, let's say we have another type of data that we have is something like anatomical data. So let's say left hand, and then wake up computer, there we go, okay. So this is now, and now let's say anatomy plot 3D. So now what this will do is get geometrical data, hopefully, for a hand. It's got to communicate with the network, with the cloud here, to be able to do this. There we go. Okay, so now we've got this this hand. We can go ahead and manipulate that. Maybe what we could do is take we could take the geometry of a particular bone. Let's say, I don't know, bones in the hand. Let's see whether we have bones in left hand. Let's see whether I can ask it that. Okay, skeleton of left hand, great. Let's see what, well, I can certainly make an anatomy plot of that. I wonder if I can say, what properties does it know of that, and see whether I can get a list of bones. Come on. It has to, this should be very fast. Something, I think this network's only got slower. No, there we go, okay. Let's see. I don't know what any of these are, but let's try something like bone articulation. So let's say this, and let's say bone articulation of that. Let's see what that does. Not available. That's no fun. Well, let's take a bone I definitely know. Let's say left femur, for example. And now what I can do is take a mesh region of that. So now what I've got, I can get the 3D geometry of that bone. And for example, what I could do is to say, let's take that bone, let us put a, let's do this. Let's say, show that, let's do this. Okay, that wasn't very exciting. Let's say, that wasn't exciting either. So what I wanted to do was to try and do some geometry on this bone. So for example, let's say I say something like region distance. So now I'm going to compute the distance from that bone to, let's say, the 0.00 So I'm thinking of that. Okay, so that's saying that so that's computing in 3D space. It's taking a point near the bone and it's saying how far is it to that point. So let's say, for example, I do this and I say a point Z here. Now let's make a plot with, let's say, Z going from -100 to 100. And this should show me how far away that point. Oh, that wasn't very exciting. Let's try. I think I was too far away from the bone. Let's try -10 to 10. That's what I was, no, come on, let's try something else here. No, it's really boring. That was always, maybe I need to try, all right, I'll try this. That was why I was trying to work out, there we go. Okay, so this is now showing, as this point moves closer to the bone, it's able to compute the distance from that point to this 3D surface, which is a kind of a complicated problem in geometry. I could also, these are types of things that we can compute. But the point is that you can expect to take, if you're doing some engineering computation, you can expect to take something like this geometrical object and immediately start doing computations with it. Let me show you one other thing. So the stuff I've been showing you is all sort of local to this computer. If you want to kind of interact with the outside world, you might, let's say you want to make a website that, let's live really dangerously. Let's make a website that shows you pictures of bones. So what it's going to do is it's going to say, let's do this. Let's say we make a form that's going to be deployed to the web. Yeah, this is living too dangerously. Let's do something with cities instead. Let's so let's say we want to make this form, and we want to say make something which shows a geographic image of let's say a region, let's say 5 kilometers around the center of that city, and let's say we want to put this on the web as a PNG. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say, deploy this to the cloud, and let's tell it to make it something which is a completely public website. And so now what this is going to do is it's going to take that little piece of code and it's going to create a website from that piece of code. And now we can go there and we should have something which is now deployed on the web, and it says, okay, show me it says, give me a city here. Let's say we say Lima, and now we say hit enter. And now this is now a website that actually anybody can access because I've made it a public site. And now it will give us a 5 kilometer radius map there. So this is something where this is now taking what we've done in Wolfram language here and deploying it as something that can be used on the web. And if you're building some big software engineering system, you might say, make me an API that another program can call to do this computation, and so on. So this is kind of a, this is part of how you turn this from something that is just doing computation internally to something that can be used as part of a large-scale system. And in fact, what's happening a lot is inside big systems at banks and healthcare companies and all this kind of thing. There's starting to be lots of Wolfram language code that's running large-scale systems where underneath what's happening is just like the kinds of things I've been showing you, but in the outset, it's running on many servers and so on, and eventually providing what's needed for a production system. All right, well, so maybe I can say a little bit, maybe it might be interesting to people to know the kind of personal story of how all this stuff got built. Maybe I can talk about that just for a minute. I personally got interested in science when I was pretty young, and I got interested in physics and started, kind of discovered that you could learn a lot of physics just by reading books and so on. Today I would learn it by looking at the web instead. So when I was kind of a mid-teenager, I started writing papers, publishing papers on physics and so on. But one of the things that happened when I was doing that physics research was that I needed to do a lot of mathematical computation, and I wasn't particularly good at that, and I found it really boring to do. And so I thought, let me see if I can automate that kind of work. And that's what got me involved in using computers to create automated systems, and in particular to automate mathematical computation. And so I used a bunch of systems that existed that people had built as sort of prototype systems at the time. Then in 1979, actually, I decided that I'd sort of outgrown all the systems that had been built in the world up to that point. And so the only way to go forward was to build a system for myself. And so I built kind of my first computer system and language at that time. That was kind of a great prototype for things that I would build subsequently with Wolfram language. But one of the things that I ended up doing as a result of that is kind of rethinking the way that I viewed science in general. And kind of the dominant idea in science had been, you know, take a phenomenon in nature and try and create a mathematical equation that can describe that phenomenon. And I got interested in how one can kind of generalize that idea and see what kind of models one could construct for the world that aren't set up as mathematical equations. And that got me into studying kind of how one can use programs as models for things in the world. And so let me show you an example of what I got into doing there. I was interested in kind of what do typical simple programs do. If we're going to use them, we might use them as models for the world, we might use them for other purposes. And so in particular, I got interested in studying these things called cellular automata. Here's a typical example of how one of these works. It's just a line of black and white cells, and it has a rule that says at each step, each cell looks at the color that it has and the colors its neighbors have, and then decides what color to make the cell on the next step. So if I take that rule and I say, let's start it off from, let's just start it from, how about we do this? We just start it from an initial condition that just says there's one black cell, and let's run it for 40 steps or something, and then let's say make a plot. So this is what it will do. Running that particular rule, it will just make we have a very simple rule, and it just makes a very simple pattern of behavior. Okay. And now the question is, what happens if you change that rule a bit? So let's say, for example, we have this rule instead. Let's try that rule, see what it does. So, okay, with that rule, instead of just getting this uniform black pattern, we get this alternating pattern. If we keep now, we can ask the question, well, what happens if we just look at all possible rules? Actually, let me look at one other rule here. Let's say we look at this rule here. Well, with that rule, this is the behavior we get. So even though the rule is really simple, the behavior we're getting is a bit more complicated. We can run that a little bit longer. Let's try running it for 400 steps, for example, with this particular rule. And what we'll get is this pattern that is, even though the rule was really simple, the pattern is at least very intricate, even if it's quite regular in its structure. But then the big thing that I thought about doing a long time ago is just doing kind of a computer experiment and saying, well, what do all possible rules of the general type we're talking about here, what do all possible rules do? So we can say, make a table of all possible rules here, let's say the first 64 rules. And now what this is going to do is for every picture here is going to correspond to evolution according to a different rule from just a single black cell at the beginning. So most of them give very simple behavior. Some of them give these nested patterns. Just occasionally, you get an even more complicated form of behavior. And this is rule 30 in the sort of sequence of rules here. And let's try looking at what that does if we run it longer. So we can say rule 30 here. Let's try running that longer. Here's what happens. So this is, for me, this is a very remarkable thing because the rule that we're using here is very simple. We could just say, what does the rule look like? Okay, the rule looks like this. That's the rule. Now the behavior that it produces is this very complicated thing here. So this is sort of a remarkable phenomenon because even though the rule is simple, the behavior is complicated. And we might have thought that if we wanted to build something as complicated as that picture, we'd have to go to a lot of trouble. We'd have to construct a lot of rules. We'd have to make a very complicated sort of engineering plan for how to create a thing like this. But in fact, the way we can create this is just using this very simple rule here. So this phenomenon of the way that one can generate complexity from simple programs is something that I got really interested in and ended up building a whole sort of new kind of science that's based on understanding kind of the computational universe of possible programs and what they do. This particular phenomenon, that even a very simple program can show very complicated behavior, turns out to be pretty important for the way one thinks about a lot of kinds of things. It's important in the way one thinks about modeling systems in nature. It's also important in thinking about the way that one creates engineering systems, because usually when we build an engineering system, what we think of doing is we think of saying, okay, we want a system that does this or that thing. Let's construct it step by step, where we always know at every step how the system is going to behave. But what this suggests is that just by searching through, like we did here, just by searching through, just by searching through a collection of possible rules, we might just find one that does something interesting. And so this is kind of a different approach to engineering, where you're essentially doing, where you're just searching the computational universe of possible programs and trying to sort of mine programs that do interesting things. And so, for example, Rule 30 happens to be a program that is really good at making apparent randomness. So the center column here is, for all practical purposes, completely random. But what we can think of doing is we say, let's make a very efficient generator of randomness. Well, we can find that not by constructing it, by thinking about things kind of as step-by-step engineers, but rather by just going out into this universe of possible programs and just saying, let's search for one that has the property that makes good randomness like this. And then we'll find Rule 30. And that's kind of a different approach than the sort of traditional approach to engineering. That's an approach where we are, we're saying this is the goal we want to achieve, and now we're simply going to search the space of possible systems to find one which achieves that goal. The thing that's complicated about that is we can find very efficient systems, but it is hard for us humans to understand what's going on inside the system. A place where this is also happening is in machine learning, when we're looking at, for example, this neural network system. This was something where it's very much the same kind of thing. We construct this neural net. In this particular case, we train the neural net. Then we have to see how the neural net behaves, and it may be very hard for us to understand the inside of what's going on there. Well, okay, from a personal point of view, I spent quite a number of years kind of building up this area of science that is concerned with understanding sort of this computational universe of possible programs. I started building Mathematica and Wolfram language to help support that project. But then that project also sort of taught me a bunch of foundational, almost philosophical things that were really important in understanding how to continue building technology. So, for example, one of the things that was of interest to me was, how do you build something which is, for example, a general computational knowledge system, a system that can kind of answer questions about the world, let's say, where you can just ask it a question, let's say in natural language, and it will be able to respond to it. And I had long thought about building such a system, and I had always assumed that to build a system like that, you would have to kind of solve the general problem of artificial intelligence, and that you would have to kind of build a system that sort of thought like a brain thinks. But what I realized is that, in fact, as a result of the science that I did, that there's sort of no distinction between what is the sort of complexity that you can produce purely with computation and what's the kind of thing that you can do with something like a brain. And so that kind of led me to realize that it should be possible to build this kind of computational knowledge system using sort of pure computational tools. And that's what led to building Wolfram Alpha. And if you haven't seen Wolfram Alpha, let me just show you. Actually, I could. There we go. So the idea of Wolfram Alpha is you just ask it a question. You know, what is the population of Lima? And it will then say. It will then go and try and here. Let me make this a bit bigger. Oops. It will then go and say, okay. First of all, assuming Lima is a city, it'll understand the natural language that I typed in. It says, assuming Lima is a city, uses administrative division. It's assuming Lima, Peru. There are several other Limas in the world. Apparently there's a Lima in, there's a Lima in Paraguay as well, apparently. There's a Lima in Illinois as well. So now this is telling us some information it thinks we might find interesting, like the population as a function of time in Lima, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's take as an example, let's take that city there. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's just take what is the population of Lima divided by, let's say, Lima, Illinois. Kind of a weird comparison. Let's see whether it figures out what I mean by that. Okay, so it's saying population of Lima, Peru divided by the population. Okay, so Lima, Peru has 68,000 times as many people as Lima, Illinois, and we can then compute the time series and so on. But the idea of building Wolfram Alpha was something that kind of occurred because I had sort of understood the sort of philosophy of how computation works to the point where it became clear that it was possible to build something like this. So Wolfram Alpha came out first in 2009, and we've been steadily expanding it. In fact, quite a lot of work on Wolfram Alpha has been done here in Peru, particularly work on socioeconomic, geographic, socioeconomic, geopolitical kinds of computation. Our goal in Wolfram Alpha is to be able to compute, is to be able to answer questions about all kinds of things. And to be able to do that using natural language, and that's what we've been achieving there. And kind of typically what happens is you get data, and the data is at first something where you are just kind of being able to study the data as kind of raw data. Then you curate it. You make it more computable. Eventually it gets to the point where you can ask questions about at least individual pieces in that data. And then eventually it gets to the point where you can be systematic and you can start saying something like, let's say we've got, we want entities, let's say cities. Let's say we want, let's say cities largest by population. Okay, so let's say we say something like this. To be able to make something like this work, so I'm going to say, of all cities that we know about, show me the 10 largest in population. If you want this to work, you have to be able to curate the data to the point where you know that you didn't miss any cities, because otherwise it's not going to correctly tell you the 10 largest cities. Let's just see what those look like if we do a, I'm just curious, show a bubble chart of that, comma, population. Let's see what that looks like. So that works. Up. No, that's not, didn't work. What do I want to do? 76. Okay, so this is now, so that's just showing that result. But in order to get data to the point where you can compute with it, you have to have sort of organized the data and curated the data to the point where you know that there isn't some city missing in the list of cities. So, well, I could talk a bit about there are a lot of things that we're kind of doing right now to try and as we try and sort of make everything as computational as possible. One of the things that's been of interest is kind of what's the trajectory of artificial intelligence? What can we automate? How should we think about the process of automating things? I see the real goal as being, that there's a question sort of what does the computer do versus what does the human do? And the way I see it is the human is responsible for defining the goal, defining what it is that they want to do, and then the computer is responsible for automating as much as possible how to get that goal achieved. And so then the question is really, how do the humans tell the computer what they want to do? And so I view Wolfram language as a sort of, the objective is to kind of make a bridge between what humans think about trying to do and what the computer is capable of doing. And it's a way of expressing how to, a way of allowing humans to express what they want in such a way that the computer can understand what it is then supposed to do. And we want the computer to do what it does as automatically as possible. So there are many things that we've been trying to do to increase that level of automation that exists. One that I've been particularly interested in recently is kind of a problem that's been around for about 400 years, really, maybe more. People 400 years ago, particularly 300 years ago, people tried to say, can we make kind of a philosophical language, a language which expresses concepts about the world, but not in any particular human language, but just allows you to describe concepts about the world. Like if you write a legal contract, can you write that legal contract not in an ordinary natural language like English or Spanish, but in some kind of formal language so that that contract can be interpreted by not only humans, but also by some automated system. And I think finally, after about 300 years, we're really close to being at the point where it's possible to express in a kind of symbolic language that can be understood by computers and by AIs, what it is that we want to, the sort of objectives that we have. One reason that's important is if you think about kind of telling AIs what to do, we want the best possible way to tell AIs what to do, both in terms of specific things and in terms of general things. I mean, people get worried sometimes maybe the AIs are going to take over and they're going to, the humans are going to get left behind and so on. So one of the things you want to do is set up a set of principles for how the AIs should work. You need some kind of constitution about AIs defining things like, okay, AIs, be nice to humans. What does that mean? How do you express that thought in a language that is understandable to an AI as well as to a human? And that's the kind of thing that I've been interested in. So I should say there are many other things I could talk about, but one of the things I've spent many years doing is building a company that can kind of take these sort of abstract ideas that we have and turn them into real products that are actually useful to millions of people around the world. And that's been an interesting process. The company is, it's only 800 people, about 26 or so in Peru, is that right? Something like that. That's been sort of an interesting journey in building up over the last 30 years. This kind of what I see the company is doing is it's a machine for turning ideas that we have into real products and real software that people can use. And that's sort of an exciting thing to do because one is going from kind of very abstract ideas to very concrete and practical things in the world. And what I've noticed is that in my own life, I've kind of gone in cycles between thinking about basic science and using the basic science to figure out technology that it's possible to building that technology, then using that technology as a tool
to do more basic science and then iterating that process. And that's been a really interesting and valuable thing to do. One of the things that the big theme of that has been use computation to do as much stuff as possible. And every few years, I'm kind of realizing how to build the next level of computational capability to be able to inject computation into more and more different kinds of fields. So I think that's the thing that I see as being kind of actually the dominant theme of the next few decades will be everything that isn't computational yet will become computational. So if you're learning if you're studying things today, learn how to think about things computationally. We've built Wolfram language to kind of automate as much as possible about how to do that computational thinking. The thing that people should be thinking about doing is taking those computational capabilities and making use of them in every different field. And what will happen is each field, as this kind of new paradigm hits it, there will be a period of expansion in every field. So in a field of what tends to happen in general in fields is that there are periods of rapid growth and then periods of comparative slowness. So for example, machine learning is a field that is in rapid growth right now. Eventually it will slow down. Machine learning was in extremely slow growth for 50 years until about 5 years ago when it suddenly started taking off. But what will happen is that in lots of different fields, the idea and the ability to use computation in that field will suddenly arrive, and then there will be a period of kind of rapid expansion in those fields. And I think one of the things that I would say is that to learn sort of computational thinking is sort of a critical thing for people at this point, because that's the thing that is going to be the future of so many different fields. And that's kind of the core kind of skill that people should have in order to be important contributors to those kinds of fields. So I should stop there, and I'm really happy to have discussion, questions, other kinds of things. So thank you. So please.
So about artificial intelligence, this is a field that was recently growing, I think. There is a big debate about if artificial intelligence is going to be dangerous for us, if we keep developing it and not put some constraints, or if we should actually explode all the advantages it will bring for us. What is your opinion on the matter?
Well, so first of all, the path of technology is inexorable. I mean, the history of technology has been we automate more and more stuff, and we will go on automating, and AI is just another step in that process of automation. There will be more jobs that used to be done by humans that will be done by machines. That's been the history of the whole of human history, basically. That's been going on. There will be a shift in what kinds of, for example, right now, many jobs that involve repeated judgment are about to be automated. So, for example, if you do radiology in medicine, studying X-rays and things, it is now the case that machines can do that better than people, right? So that's something where there's a judgment to be made: is this bone broken or not? That is a repeated judgment, and we can teach a machine how to do that better than we can get humans. There are other kinds of jobs that involve, humans persuading other humans of things. Okay, probably better to have a human do that. There are other things, but the question is, what can you not automate? And the answer is, in the end, you can't automate answering the question, what should you do? Because, in other words, the machine may be very good at doing something that you tell it to do, but it is not, the machine can't define what the goal is. Almost by definition, that's not an automatable thing, right? So, the machine will sit there on your desk and it'll be incredibly smart, but if you say, okay, what do you want to do, machine? It doesn't know. There's no meaning to that kind of question. It's similar to the question of I view computation as being a very ubiquitous thing. So lots of systems in nature are also doing computation. You know, the weather is doing computations and things. And if you say, you know, what is its goal? What is its objective? It doesn't really have an objective. So that's kind of the way to think about it. That's the thing that is not automatable. And what we're going to see happen with technology is more and more technology will help us, you know, given that we have a goal, have technology help us achieve that goal. We have a GPS in a car. The goal is go to this place. The GPS tells us how to do it. You know, in the question of sort of machines taking over, I think the real image that I have of what's going to happen is increasingly, you know, soon there'll be nice augmented reality systems and things, and we'll be able to have this little display that says, okay, you should, and the system will know about, you know, sort of the outside world, and the system will be able to say, you know, to give us advice about what to do. So it might say, you know, in this situation, it might say, okay, who's that person? Okay, fine. Let's compare that face with a bunch of faces we have. Let's figure out, okay, that's this person. You know, what is this person interested in? Oh, yeah, you should make sure to talk about this because that's something that you know about that that person is interested in. And, you know, for a while, people will say, I'm in charge. I know what I want to do. But pretty soon, you'll realize that the machine is giving you pretty good advice about what to do. And you'll end up just taking that advice, just like most people just follow the GPS, you know, in a car. So I think the kind of the image of machines taking over is much more that the auto-suggest feature will become the thing that people choose to do, so to speak. So the machine will figure out, but as I say, the main overarching thing is sort of, it's like humans define the goals, machines automate that. Now, one question is, you know, how do the machines actually do what they do, and what constraints do you put on the machines? So, for example, that comes up a lot in, well, self-driving cars, autonomous weapons. There are a bunch of places where you have to kind of define what should the machines do, and for that you might think you need some code of ethics to define for the machines, right? This is a very complicated problem, because if you say, is there some principle that the machines can follow? Can you build in one piece of code that says what should the machines do? Turns out that's really impossible. In fact, that's a problem philosophers have been thinking about sort of forever. What is the, you know, how should we set the world up so that it is the best, so to speak? And there is no simple answer to that. So my best guess is that the best thing we can do is to try to set up what amounts to something like a constitution for the AIs that defines something that is sort of like a code of laws that's like what humans do, and that will end up with something which is essentially this big, complicated, you know, piece of code that is our best representation of what we want the AIs to do. Now, needless to say, not everybody will agree about what the AIs should do. And there's a whole set of questions about what do you do in that situation. I was thinking about one of my crazy ideas from very recently, okay, I was thinking about what is the future of democracy in a world where computation is ubiquitous, okay? So right now, one of the things that's kind of weird about democracy is that people just vote for things. They say, okay, there are 3 possibilities. I'm going to vote for this. I'm going to vote for that, okay? So one of my crazy ideas, which won't work, okay? So I haven't figured out the version that does work. But a version that doesn't work, but it's an interesting thing to think about, is what if instead of just saying, I want this, this, or this, everybody produced a program? So one thing to explain is, you know, 500 years ago, so the world was transformed by literacy. People started to be able to read and write. And that hadn't been possible before. And all sorts of things developed in the world as a result of that. Some good things, some bad things, whatever. You know, bureaucracy and, you know, big governments and complicated things like that. That was one consequence of literacy. So now, in today's world, probably a smaller fraction of people can communicate well with computers and can write code and things as were literate in the pre-literacy period. But eventually, perhaps soon, a large fraction of the world's population will be able to communicate with computers, maybe in a language like Wolfram language, for example, which is, you know, easy for humans to write and easy for computers to understand in a sophisticated way. And so there'll come a point where a largish fraction of people are sort of literate in a computer language. And at that point, people can start expressing themselves in a language which is also understandable to computers. So one of the recent crazy ideas is instead of voting, so to speak, you say, okay, here's a piece of code that I've created that represents what I want to have happen in the world, right? So, and you can imagine, and so then the idea is you take all those pieces of code, millions of pieces of code from different people in a country or whatever else, and you try and combine those pieces of code, and you say, okay, what can we now do? You know, you have some system that says, what can we now do that optimizes things based on all these different constraints represented by all these pieces of code? Now, not clear what the answer should be, because let's say, you know, half the people say, we want to rename our country this, and half the people say, no, we don't want to do that. What do you actually do? Right? That doesn't solve that problem. But it's sort of interesting to think about, given this kind of computational paradigm, how do the things that we are used to in the world, how do they evolve? And I think pretty much everything that we know now will evolve in some way as a result of kind of this computational paradigm. That's just an example of that. So, yeah. Yeah, please.
¿Puedo preguntar en español? Sí. Ah, ya. Bueno, yo creo que uno de los grandes problemas en temas de computer science.
Okay.
I think one of the biggest problems in computer science is translating.
Ah, ya. Yo creo, bueno, que estamos, pero sumamente lejos de la verdadera tema de inteligencia en machine learning. Porque no todos los problemas matemáticos se pueden expresar a través de algoritmos. Un teorema pues famoso es el teorema de Gödel, de la incompletud de Gödel. Y mi pregunta es, pues básicamente, bueno, que yo creo que mientras que nuestro pensamiento pues evoluciona y nuestra pues biología pues evoluciona, va a haber lógicas pues mucho más expresivas para poder modelar pues las funciones computables y problemas que pueden ser pues computables, ¿no? Entonces, y tengo una pregunta, ¿y cuán lejos cree que estamos de la verdadera inteligencia, ¿no? Porque para el tema de machine learning o temas de inteligencia artificial, porque si bien pues la matemática pues avanza totalmente independiente de la física, pues cosa que es un gran problema pues para la humanidad.
Okay. So, well, let's see. There are different kinds of metrics for artificial intelligence. And so one of the things I've noticed is over the 40 years or so that I've been involved with computers, people have kept on saying, when we can do this, then we will know we have artificial intelligence. Okay? When we can make a computer do mathematics, when we can make a computer play chess, when we can make a computer recognize images. And a few years go by, and then we succeed in doing that next thing, right? And the thing so for example, today, one of the areas that we still haven't been able to do is get a computer to have a conversation with a person, right? That will come within the next 2 or 3 years. It will be rather, that particular thing hasn't advanced very rapidly for a long time. The conversations the computers will have won't be that exciting, but they'll be decent, and they'll be able to have, for example, for customer service type interactions, I am trying to buy a plane ticket to go from here to there, something like this. Those conversations, it will be perfectly possible to have in a fairly natural human-like way. And then people will get used to that, and they'll say, now we want something else. But every one of these things that humans do, I think, will be automatable. Now, you also raise questions about things like Gödel's theorem and so on. So that's a more theoretical level of question. And there, okay, so let me explain a basic point about that. So the issue is, what is it possible to compute, right? So for example, if I go back to these cellular automata, one of my all-time favorite cellular automata is, let me show you it. It is rule number 110. Okay, that's what it does. Let's run it a bit longer. Let's say we run it for 1,000 steps. Okay, so if you can see there, we started off from just one black cell at the top. This particular one only grows on the left, so it just makes a triangle like this. We see it has some complicated, weird structure over here. And so we might ask the question, what is going to happen in the end, right? What's going to be the result of this computation, okay? Well, one way we can find that out is just by running the computation, right? If we run it, let's run it for 3,000 steps. Might take it a little bit longer. See if we can even display it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so that was a big, okay, so now if you can see it, you can probably see it, yep. Okay, it turns out, I didn't quite get there. Well, I happen to know that after about 3,000 or 4,000 steps, this particular rule stabilizes and it does something very simple. But the question is, can we know in advance what it's going to do? And the answer is no. And part of the reason is that this particular cellular automaton, with great effort, we proved that this is a universal computer. So it's actually any computation that we do, it's doing a computation, we're doing a computation. The computation that we can do can't be any more sophisticated than its computation because it's a universal computer, so it can do any computation. So this is a case where it's a phenomenon I call computational irreducibility, and it's closely related to Gödel's theorem. And it basically is something where we can't kind of jump ahead and see what the result is going to be. Now that problem, when we try and predict things in the world, that problem bites us all the time. Like I was mentioning to some people earlier, next week in the US, there is going to be a total eclipse, okay? So that's an interesting phenomenon where you can try and compute, when will the moon be in exactly the right place to make a total eclipse? So the thing that, let me see if I can pull something up that might be fun for people here. The thing that, let's see if I have one here. Yeah, maybe that one. Okay, so this is, so when you compute the motion of planets, you can do it using Newton's laws, okay? For the two-body problem, where you're just looking at, one planet going around a star, it's very simple. You just get ellipses and so on. The three-body problem, however, is very complicated. So this is actually this is the equations for the three-body problem, and this is just a solution to the three-body problem for a particular initial condition. So what you see is that it's really complicated. And in fact, this three-body problem, which is the problem you have to solve for the Earth, Moon, Sun system to know when an eclipse is going to happen, that problem, I suspect, is an example of a problem that has this computational irreducibility feature that, in this particular case, it's really hard to know what will those three bodies do. All this is doing is solving the equations of motion, Newton's equations for those three bodies, yet that's what it does. Actually, there are some examples. Okay, so there, sometimes it's really easy to see what's going to happen. In this particular case, it's pretty easy to see what's going to happen. In some other cases, it's much harder to see what's going to happen. But these are examples. So this is an example in, these are just a bunch of examples of the three-body problem I was trying to find for a post that I was writing. These are sort of practical examples of computational irreducibility. Okay, so that's kind of the story of what you can compute, what you can't compute. You asked about mathematics. I mentioned a couple of things about that. I've been interested for a long time in what is the space of all possible mathematics. So mathematics, as we practice it, is based on particular axiom systems. So we talk about arithmetic, we talk about geometry, but we could imagine just writing down kind of an arbitrary axiom system that just says this is the formal set of relations that should be true. And so one question that I got interested in a while ago is, let me see if I can find this, is, here, let me go somewhere here. So this is the online version of that big book I was mentioning called New Kind of Science that I wrote. And there's a section here about mathematics, and somewhere here, so this is an example of, wake up, website, come on, that is very, very slow loading. Okay, so this is an example of a kind of a generalization of mathematics. So the way this works is, down the left are listed a bunch of possible axiom systems for mathematics. Across the top are listed a bunch of theorems. And basically there's a black dot whenever a particular theorem is true for a particular axiom system. So one question is, the kinds of axiom systems that we use in current mathematics, where do they occur in here? So one that I was really interested in was logic, Boolean algebra. And so I set myself the task of finding the simplest axiom system that represents Boolean algebra. So let's see if I can find it here. Here we go. So let's see. Let's do this. So this is now, let me show you something. So there we go. So that axiom up there turns out to be equivalent to Boolean algebra. It's the simplest axiom system that's possible for logic. So given that axiom system, you can prove that it is equivalent to ordinary logic. This is the proof. So it's an automated proof. I don't know how to read this proof. It's one of the, so each one of these things, we can go click here, we can see, okay, that's the proof of that particular lemma, and it's saying this thing, using lemma 44, it's equal to that, using lemma this, it's equal to that, and eventually this proves that A dot A dot, whatever it is equal to this, okay? Now, one thing that I find interesting about this process is this is an automated proof, and it is something where the computer can easily verify that this is correct, but we humans have no idea why it's true. So the issue is, can we kind of turn that into something which we as humans understand? And that's a general problem, because when we understand something, what we typically do is we say, we can sort of tell a story about why it is true. So for example, if the lemmas here, if one of them was a lemma, you know, Smith's lemma, Jones's lemma, whatever else, if they had a story, if they were a lemma that we'd given a name to and it had a whole story, we could explain what was going on. This problem of having things that are automatically generated that we can't explain is the exact same problem that we have in AI, because we have these neural networks which do things, we can't explain it, we don't have a story behind it. It's also the same problem that we have in physics and in science, because we see a lot of things in the world where we can explain perhaps with a model how they happen, but we can't tell a story about why they happen. And so this is a kind of this is the long arm of Gödel's theorem, basically reaching into practical kinds of things that we encounter. That there are these things where there's something where we can see what happens, but we can't turn that into a thing which is sort of human at the level of being able to describe a story. So just one last thing about that is, when you build a computer language, the goal is to take lumps of computational work and give them names that become primitives in the language. And so essentially the role of a computer language is to try and take all these computations you might imagine, and as much as possible turn them into things where we can talk about them as humans. Anyway, that was a long answer to that. Please, yes.
Good night, Mr. Wolf. Talked some initiatives you were doing with Wolfram from education. So my question would be, why is it important to teach computational thinking in schools?
Okay. Because it's the future of what everybody will be doing. In other words, you could ask the question, okay, so a sort of analogy is probably mathematics. I think mathematics kind of overshot what it should be teaching. That is, there is some basic mathematics that is obviously useful to everybody. There's kind of mathematical thinking, which is very useful because it's kind of about systematizing how you think about things. And that is something that sort of almost everybody can find a reason why, it needs to be able to systematize how they think about things. The point about computational thinking is, well, pick a profession. Name a profession, any profession, and we'll talk about why somebody in that profession might care about there's somebody there who's going to, oops, no, you want to, well, just name a profession, anything. The mathematician. What? I'm sorry, what? Psychologist. Okay, we'll pick psychologist. Okay, all right. So let's talk about the future of psychology. Okay, or psychiatry, for example. So today, when a lot of that involves, you talk to the patient, right, about what's happened in their life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The future of that, which is already happening, is you say to the patient, give me your last year of social media postings, right? And right, and that you can immediately see a lot of issues, psychological issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But how do you analyze that? Do you read the whole thing? No, you give it to a computer, and there's some computational thinking involved in figuring out what to do. So, for example, if you see the person's social network has gone from this big extended network to this tiny network where they're not talking to anybody, that's probably kind of a sign that they're depressed and they're kind of withdrawing from the world and things like this. But if you think about things in computational terms, you can understand, okay, there's the social network that the person had, at the beginning of the year, then there's a different social network that they had at the end of the year. That's something that, computational thinking gives you a way to reason about that, and a way to, where the patient shows up and says, here's a big pile of data. This is what's going to happen throughout medicine. So, for example, a big thing is sensor-based medicine. So it's very easy to have, I have a bunch of sensors that measure all kinds of junk. I like measuring all kinds of things about myself. I think for example, one thing I did, can pull up all kinds of random stuff here. Let's show you something from the past. Let's see. I could probably pull up some real-time data, but let me look at. Let's see where I've got some stuff from the past. Here we go. This is from years ago, actually. But so that's a plot, for example, of. That's a plot. I have the more recent version as well, but that's a plot of the time when I sent every piece of email that I sent for. Well, now I have it for 30 years. And so, well, that particular plot, you don't see anything very interesting other than that was the period of time when I was working on that big science book and my sleep schedule got really weird. And this is more recent times. And that's my dinner break there. So you can see all kinds of stuff. I've got all kinds of data on, let's see, what are some other things? That's keystrokes typed on the computer. Let's see, that's my probability because when I'm running a company and things, that's my probability for being on the phone as a function of time of day, all those kinds of things. But anyway, the thing is that there's a lot of stuff that one can measure about a person and so on. And for medicine, one of the big things is that one is going to be able to get, sensor-based medicine is just going to deliver tons of data about people. The problem is the medical profession right now is not well equipped to deal with this because current diagnostic methodology basically says, patient comes in, do they have A or B? Discrete choices, not there's 100 megabytes of data that the patient has about this or that thing. What do we conclude from that? So we have to kind of think more about how to imagine, for example, medical diagnosis in a world where everything is lots of data. For example, in right now ICD-10, I don't know does Peru use ICD-9 or ICD-10 or one of the other diagnostic code systems? I don't know. But these systems that for coding for human diseases. So they have maybe 50,000 diseases in a hierarchical tree. And there's the question of how you decide which branch of that tree you go down based on symptoms and so on. So there's all kinds of sort of computational thinking involved in going from this big lump of data that you have about a person to understanding this diagnosis, to understanding how you treat something and so on. So there's that's an example of kind of the story of how that might work. And you can pick any profession and you'll find that there's somebody said mathematician. Let me say something about mathematician, okay? So I think the big thing for mathematics is experimental mathematics. So right now, the way mathematicians work is they say, let's progress by, coming up with, we've got these things we know are true. Let's try and prove the next theorem, okay? It turns out many mathematicians of the past, from Gauss to other people, a lot of what they actually did was they did some experiment. Like they would figure out, what's the density of prime numbers, roughly? Okay, I know roughly what it is. Now let me try and prove that. But experiments in mathematics are not nearly as common as they should be, because mathematics methodologically involves this sort of, let's try and prove a theorem about what we have, not let's try to figure out what's true, and then sort of explore the universe of what's true, and maybe then bring in the theorem, so to speak. So I think that that's for mathematicians, I think an example of a big thing is experimental mathematics. I'm not sure whether mathematics as a discipline will ever really absorb experimental mathematics. It may be that there will be a new discipline that is experimental mathematics that's separate from the current discipline of mathematics. Now, for mathematics itself, for example, we've been interested in the following problem. So if you look at the literature of mathematics, there are about 3 million theorems that exist in the published literature of mathematics. And so, we've been involved in curating lots of kinds of things. And so one of the things we're interested in is, let's see whether we have an example of that. We're interested in, let's say we want to curate, okay, let me give you an example here. So let's say we'd say, we might curate movies, for example. So then we've got I could take, 10 random movies. We've probably got data on these movies. So internet wakes up here. There we go. Okay, now let's take another one. Here's another thing we've been curating is function spaces. So that's a very different, this thing here is curating movies that happen to have been produced. But another artifact that's been built by our civilization is the study. Actually, I should have just made a random list of them. That was a bad idea. Let me, oh no, there we go. Okay, so these are all kinds of funky function spaces. So I don't know, I don't actually know what this one is, but let's say a Bergman space, whatever it is. Let's say that, and let's say, what do we know about that? So this is another area of, maybe you guys know what this is. I don't know this particular one. So now we'll have a certain amount of data, hopefully, about, that wasn't good. I think we had too much data about that thing. That's a bad sign. Well, anyway, we'll have certain data about that. There we go. Okay, so now we have data about that function space. It says this is the dual space map. These are people associated with that function and space and so on. So this is kind of another piece of the future of mathematics, is being able to take, this is kind of empirical metamathematics, taking the actual theorems that have been proved and being able to do computations about the space of theorems that have been proved. So it's kind of another direction. Okay, another, please.
Hello. Hello.
Oh, up there. Yes, please.
Yes. First, thank you. My name is Giancarlo Videla, and well, I learned a lot from you. You share a lot of information with us, and thank you. I have two questions. The first one is in relation with the artificial intelligence. Have you heard about OpenAI, the enterprise business founded by Elon Musk and founder of Tesla Motors and SpaceX?
Yeah.
And the other, Sam Altman, founder of Y Combinator. They have $1 billion in cash to fund this?
Yeah, I actually visited there about 6 weeks ago or so now. Yes, so I do know them, yes.
Yes, and well, my next question is, what do you think about him, Elon Musk? Is he doing well? Is he saving humanity? I don't know.
So I know Elon Musk, and I guess, let's see, I haven't seen him in person in probably 6 months or 9 months. I think I've exchanged email with him recently. He's a very he likes taking ideas that are, he's very takes a lot of risks with ideas, and so I think one of the, okay, I'll tell one, yeah. I'm thinking whether this is a story I can tell. Let's see. It's he has a lot of wild ideas about he's very keen on this idea of we should not be a one planet species and things like this. He's also a very practical guy. So he'll talk about he's going to build all these rockets to do this or that or the other thing. But when he actually needs to build a rocket, he bought the plans from these old Russian rockets, and he's using those to develop his actual rockets and so on. So he kind of has this interesting mix of having the kind of very visionary, I'm going to make rockets to go to Mars and so on, and the very practical, let's actually figure out how to do that. I think in terms of his thoughts about AI, he and I have talked about this at some length. I think his, I don't know, I think it's more, he has this idea, which I don't think is right, that that somebody is going to figure out, how to make, okay, so that somehow the dynamics of the system are going to be such that AI becomes a monopoly, as in there is one AI that learns more than other AIs, and it will be able to learn more and more and more, and eventually there'll be a sort of a single AI that kind of takes over. I just don't think that's the way it will happen. I just don't think that's right. I don't think the value of training data and so on is high enough for that to be the case. It used to be true that there are these situations in which you might, okay, so an example. Let's say you're building a search engine, and you ask the question, is it the case that that the search engine who has the most users will always win because the search engine with the most users has the most data on which links people click on? Okay? You might think that that system will be such that there's got to be only one winner, because somebody is going to have the search engine which has more clicks than everybody else, and the clicks are going to be important, and that search engine is going to get better, and no other one is going to get better. Okay? But it turns out that just knowing what users click on is not the most important thing. It's a factor, it's a signal, but it's not the most important thing. I think it's the same with AIs, that just having more training data and having the AI do more stuff is useful, but it's not the only thing. I'm not explaining this very well. I'm trying to explain why it's a slightly technical point, why I don't think it's the case that you end up with a situation where sort of one AI takes over. But that's, and I'm not sure, my own interest right now, okay, another thing to explain is machine learning, okay, so the basic ideas of neural networks that are being used today were invented by McCulloch and Pitts in 1943, 46, sometime in the 1940s. And the current neural network architecture is really extremely similar to what McCulloch and Pitts described in the 1940s. So then, even by 1960, there were these things called perceptrons, which were essentially one-layer neural networks, two layers, no hidden layer, neural networks. And for a while, people thought perceptrons were going to be really exciting and they were going to solve all kinds of problems. And then two people, both of whom I knew, Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert, wrote a book about perceptrons in which they proved mathematically what perceptrons could do, and it wasn't all that interesting. And so this field that had been super popular for a few years, around 1960, just completely imploded. And people said, oh, neural nets are not interesting, they can't do anything. Okay? Well, Marvin Minsky particularly was always up, Marvin was a pioneer of AI, and he was always told me he was kind of upset because he thinks people took the wrong message from this book that he wrote, because they took the message, neural nets can't do anything interesting. Okay, so the whole field just died. Then in 1980, the field came back to life again. Another person I know quite well was responsible for that, and then several other people got involved, and there was this period when it was called parallel distributed processing, connectionism. Anyway, neural nets kind of came back to life around 1980. For example, I worked on neural nets back around 1980. And the bad thing was, there were a few cute things you could make neural nets do, but they couldn't really do anything very interesting. Okay? So then neural nets died again completely until basically 2011, until late 2011. And in late 2011, a particular person, graduate student, who had been working on a neural net. So people worked on neural nets, but they weren't really, nobody was paying much attention. They seemed kind of complicated and messy, and it didn't really seem to work very well. Then, kind of by mistake, somebody ran a neural net training process for doing image identification, and they thought, they ran it by mistake for a couple of weeks. They didn't think it would have done anything interesting, but before they killed it off completely, they tried actually running it. And turns out it really worked. So in other words, so it was quite by accident in early 2012, actually, that a neural net won the main image identification competition that's held every year, which had been won using these classical image processing techniques. And so then in 2012, everybody got super excited. Oh my gosh, neural nets are going to take over everything. Okay? And so people started using deep learning and trying to do things with deep learning. So then, a couple of years went by, the technology for image identification got to be better and better. We actually started building an image identification system. And so 2.5 years ago now, we released this image identification system that I actually showed you some examples of here. And it's the way that system works. We have 30 million images, which were curated, and we know what those are images of. We use that as training data to train our neural network. Okay. So here's the interesting point. So everybody's all excited about machine learning still. Turns out our image identification system from 2.5 years ago is still the state-of-the-art image identification system. So in other words, that particular area of machine learning, it made a very rapid advance from 2012 up until about 2014, 2015, and now it's kind of stabilized. And what's happening is, in machine learning, a sequence of new areas are able to be done with machine learning. But there are a limited set of problems. So for example, image identification, language translation, voice to text. These are all three of those will be done definitively and really well with neural networks. A lot of these repeated judgment tasks, like, is the bone broken in the X-ray, those kinds of things will be done very successfully. But this is not, in my opinion, this is not a giant snowball which will take over everything. This is a particular method that will work on particular kinds of problems. And literally every few weeks now, people are figuring out a new problem. Like I'll give you an example. Let's see if I can make one work here. This is, let's try this. I'm going to try one last cute little experiment here. Let us take, something like this. Let me see if I can get a picture of a Van Gogh painting. That doesn't look very good, does it? Let's try Van Gogh. So there's the artist. So let's get notable artworks from Van Gogh. And let's say we just take 10 of those. So hopefully we've got data on this. Let's see what happens here. Okay, so let's take, I'm going to get, let's get some images for these. Okay, so let's take that image there, for example. Okay, and now what I'm going to do, let's take that image. Now I take a current image. Let's take image. There we go. Terrible image. Okay, now let's try the following thing. I'm living very dangerously because I don't really know what this is going to do, but so what I'm going to do, this is a new kind of thing that we can now do with machine learning. Let's see whether we can restyle. See what will happen here. There we go. So we restyled that image of me using that Van Gogh picture. And actually, just for fun, let's just take, let's see, delete missing 98. Okay, so now we got a bunch of pictures. Let's just, for fun, let's just do, I wonder what this is going to do. Let's say, so this whole idea of image restyling, see what happens. May take a little while, actually. But this idea of image restyling is an example of a new idea for something that you can do with machine learning, which was just not really imagined as a possible thing. Okay, kind of fun. That's an interesting one there. Okay. Anyway, so what's happening is, I don't think there's going to be this runaway thing where everything gets done with machine learning. I think that's just nonsense, actually. I think what's happening, in Silicon Valley particularly, there's a belief right now that, machine learning is going to take over everything. That's everybody should invest in machine learning. It's the same thing as has happened. I've been involved in the computer industry for basically 40 years now, and I've seen the same thing over and over and over again. And yes, there will be some things that get done. There will be some companies that are successful, and it won't be everything, just as it hasn't been before. And it's something where there are different pieces that have to be added. Okay. Yes, please.
Okay, no, we are now on time, right? Okay, so first, sorry?
Go ahead.
Okay. So first of all, we want to say thank you for coming here. This is very big pleasure to have you here.
Thanks.
Right? It was an excellent talk. Okay, so first, let's say thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Finally, this talk is an excellent example of what we are looking for at UTEC University and also at the computer science program. This is exactly what we are looking for. This is a very good example for all our students to learn from you. You are very, very good. Okay, thank you and good night for all.
Wolfram?
It was excellent. And they are trying to take a picture. Maybe take a picture with one. Yeah. So you're trying to save the... Yeah. Okay. Carlos. Carlos. Carlos.
Ernesto. Carlos. Para que te pongas para la foto. Sí, pero igual. ¿Vas a sacar la foto? Yes.